We have Alex Johnson. Oh. We have Alex Johnson with us today. She's from BirdLife Australia. She's going to speak to us about what you can do to help create habitat for birds and other wildlife in your school. And we'd also like to spend some time, of course, just hearing from you about your experiences with this sort of project. If you've done a habitat project, what's helped it be successful, or what are some of the challenges that you've faced? So we'll have some time for that later on in the session. So let's hand over to Julian now, who will give an acknowledgement of country.
Yes, so thank you. Thanks, Michelle. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal and Mitchell people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge that any Indigenous people in the audience today. We're here at the Randwick Sustainability Hub. We thought we'd make it a bit more interesting and actually be outside and be together a bit, and of course we've switched on all the birds for you, so we know it can come through pretty loud at your end, but perhaps Renee might be able to confirm, but this is a site that has one of the highest diversity of small bird species. She might tell us later on.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's an incredible island of biodiversity, absolutely magic place. We might have to mute the currawongs though, so we can hear it.
We'll try and hit their mute button for later on, but we'll mostly be hearing from Alex. And of course, we've also got Vicky here.
So welcome online, everyone. We're just getting the last people getting admitted in now from the waiting room. So once they're online, I think we'll hand over to Alex, who will talk us through the presentation. And meanwhile, you may hear some critters in the background.
Well, I'll put on some mute.
We can mute ourselves. Great. Great. So we'll pass you over to Alex.
Hello, everybody. Oh, that's a bit quieter. My name's Alex and I'm from BirdLife Australia. I run the Birds in Schools program and very happy to be with you today. I'm coming from Melbourne, but it's a little quieter here today. I'm going to share a presentation. I think it'll go for about 25-30 minutes and we can chat after that. So here we go. Okay, so I know some of you are coming from schools, some of you are coming from early learning centres. Today I'm going to be coming from my experience of taking teachers and students through the Birds in Schools program. So I'll be looking at it from that perspective and the way that we usually take schools through that program. So there might be a few different things, there might be a few questions raised, but let me know as we go along if you have any of those questions, and hopefully you can get some good information out of it for your school or early learning centre. Okay, so this afternoon we're going to do a bit of an intro to BirdLife Australia, birds in backyards and birds in schools. Find out about local birds and what they need in a habitat. How to get started on a habitat project. Important features for a garden. Plant selection for food and shelter for birds. And how to avoid problem species. And I'll give you some resources as well. Okay, so I just wanted to go through a little bit about BirdLife Australia as some background for you for where I'm coming from today. So it's an independent not-for-profit organisation that's interested in conservation of native bird species. And our aim is to provide a bright future for Australia's birds. We're involved in lots of areas, so conservation, like I mentioned, science, recreation, advocacy, and of course, education. Now, Birds in Backyards is part of BirdLife Australia, and we're involved in the urban space. So we're looking at birds that are in places where people live. And Birds in Backyards also has a citizen science program that underpins it, and encourages people to take action for birds wherever they live, or at school or work. Birds in Schools, underneath that, is an education package that has been developed by Birds in Backyards. There's lesson plans, resources, and support for teachers to teach the unit, which is about 10 or 11 lessons. And it takes students through conducting habitat and bird surveys, researching local birds, making predictions and recommendations about local birds, and finally to taking action to make their school more bird friendly. So we're all in urban spaces today, and I just wanted to mention why these urban places are really important. So bird species across Australia are in decline, and it's mostly due to habitat loss. And this makes our urban places really important because this is some space that still has some habitat left for birds. So we must protect natural places, but we can also help birds in our urban areas, in either patches of original vegetation, parks, gardens, and of course, schools. So not just numbers of birds are decreasing, but the diversity, so that the amount of bird types that are found in Australia. And the process of urbanisation actually changes our natural landscapes. This means that small birds like fairy wrens, honeyeaters and finches, which were once common in our natural places and in our urban areas, are disappearing and being replaced by larger, more aggressive species that are more suited to these urban landscapes. And simplification of our gardens, which is happening more and more, has increased this change. So today we're going to talk about what you can do about that at your school. And like I mentioned, I'm going to take the approach that we do in Birds in Schools. So with Birds in Schools, what we start with is building knowledge about what birds actually occur in your area and what they need for support or management, and finding out what you can do to help them. So it's a really structured approach that involves a bit of research at the start. So what I'd suggest to get started is to do some surveys. So surveys are basically, really simple. It's just going out and recording what you observe. So for Birds in Schools, we encourage you to do a 20-minute survey. You just go outside for 20 minutes and record the types of birds you see and how many of each species. And that's in a particular area at your school. It's good to do more than one survey so you can get an idea of what lives or visits your school. And a good place to start is at our survey database, which is Bird Data. So the address is there for you. So Bird Data is our survey database, and it's super simple. It's really fun. It's a great way for students to get involved in citizen science. When you do a birds in backyards or birds in schools survey, it also provides a really useful list of birds that are found in your local area for you. It's automatically generated, so you can print it out and take it outside to go on a survey, or it's just a useful, I mean, if you're not doing the survey, it's a useful list of birds that occur in your local area. So I can give you some pointers on how to do that later if you like, but it's super easy to sign up and do a survey at home, at school, wherever you are. Okay, so once you've done a survey and had a little look at what birds are found in your area, it's good to start to think about what those birds' needs are. All different birds have different needs. They eat different foods in varying ways. They have diverse nesting requirements, and some require places to shelter from predators. So this image shows some of the different types of birds and what they eat or how they forage. So you can see all of them require different parts of a habitat. So a bird-friendly garden would look something like this. It's got different layers of vegetation and different resources for different types of birds. Okay, I'm going to go through a few birds that you might find in your area and what they might need. So I'm focusing first on what they eat because it's a pretty important part of what they're going to need in a habitat garden. So we've got insect-eating birds, fruit-eating birds, seed-eating birds, and birds of prey. So you'll see some of the ones listed there, and hopefully some of them are familiar to you. The masked lapwing, magpie lark, Australian magpie, very iconic species. These birds will probably be pretty common around your area. These ones perhaps more common. So you've got your nectar and insect-eating birds, like the rainbow lorikeet, red wattlebird, noisy miner. You've got seed-eating, sulphur-crested cockatoo, and we've got these more generalist species, the currawong, which we heard a lot of just a moment ago, the raven, and Australian white ibis. And then we've got small native bird species, which are becoming less common in urban areas. We've got nectar and seed-eating, so insect-eating birds that forage in shrubs, fruit and insect-eating birds like the silvereye that also forage in shrubs, insect-eating birds like the willy wagtail and superb fairy wren, and the welcome swallow. We also have some very common non-native birds, some that are aggressive towards native species and others that are not such a problem for other birds. So from that list, these are some of the birds that I would encourage you to provide more habitat for. So a lot of these small native species, those ones that are finding things a bit tricky in our urban spaces. Okay, so after you start thinking about which bird species you want to support or manage in your school, you can start thinking about what action you can take to support them. And there are lots of different actions. You can be planting native plants and gardens, providing bird baths, installing nest boxes, delivering community education, or managing problem birds. And that picture shows some of those elements in a habitat garden. So we've got the plants that I mentioned in the picture already, but we've also got some of those other elements like the nest boxes, bird baths. So first, I'm going to go through some of the points for if you want to go ahead with planting native plants. And this is from our experience doing birds in schools, in the schools that we've been involved with. And I'm sure some of you will have some more experiences to share with us later on. So first, really important to have approval and support for your garden from the school community. Having that support can be really helpful getting started, but also keeping a project going and making sure it's successful. And secondly, involving local councils, and you guys are a couple of steps ahead here. You've obviously got a very supportive council. Councils are great because they can offer advice and sometimes materials. They're really helpful to have on board. Think about the best time to plant. The cooler, wetter months are generally better, and I would avoid planting right before the school holidays when there's no one to look after the plants. Selecting your site is really important. You're probably going to want to find a quiet, accessible spot, and it should be sunny. Most of our native plants enjoy a bit of sun, but make sure it's not too hot. And if possible, it should be connecting to other patches of vegetation like bushlands or parks. So nearby so that birds have a larger habitat to use. If your area is also used for play, then garden beds can be a good option for schools. Site preparation is really important as well. So in schools, the ground can get quite compacted. So make sure your soil's suitable for planting. You might need some preparation there or additional soil and perhaps some mulch. We suggest that you work with existing vegetation. So you probably already have some plants in your schoolyard and you don't want to get rid of those and start all over. You want to be working around those because most vegetation can provide some resources for native birds. You can always get rid of things that you're not happy with a bit later on, once the rest of your plants have established. We also suggest to plant local species because they're the best for your local birds. And you can ask the council or specialist native nurseries about these. Another thing is to plant for structural diversity. So having lots of plants in different layers. You want trees, you want shrubs in the mid layer, you want grasses and ground covers. And that means a lot of resources will be provided for different types of birds. And again, just thinking about your target species and planting the right things for the birds that you want to encourage. Just also making sure that you're able to look after your plants. So watering them as they get established, and some pruning will help them to be attractive and dense the way that birds enjoy them. Okay, so just a couple of slides of table with some of our bird types and the food and other resources they might need. So I can provide you with this at the end, but some of the plants that each of the small and large nectar feeders and seed eaters they'll need. So large nectar feeders, you can plant Banksias, Callistemons, Eucalypts, Grevillea, Hakea, or paperbark or Coreus. And as you can see in the last column there, it lists what different species like in their habitat. So we may not be focusing on large nectar feeders because they are some of those more aggressive birds, but they will like shrubs and trees for foraging, perching and nesting, and some require hollows for nesting. Small nectar feeders, they're going to be needing a lot of shrubs, and they generally nest in those shrubs. Now moving on to fruit eaters and insect eaters, as well as meat eaters. So all the different foods that they need and the plants that you can plant to provide those, and the habitat that they require as well. And you can have another look at this a bit later on. There's a bit of detail in it. On our Birds in Backyards website, we have lists of local native plant species for a lot of the Sydney areas, including yours. So they're listed in their growth form. So at the top here, we've got trees that are suitable for your area. And just going on to the rest of the list, there are shrubs that are suitable, tussocks and ground covers. So lots of options for you, and lots of beautiful plants that provide all of the different needs for all of those different birds. Okay, so one of the problems that come up are how to discourage problem species. And they can be very tricky, especially in our urban areas. But planting those dense shrubs, particularly spiky shrubs with smaller flowers, can really help. Particularly with those aggressive species like the noisy miner or the rainbow lorikeet. And like I mentioned, planting locally native plants can also help. For non-native species like the common miner or rock doves, you can block up holes in buildings and ensure that you aren't providing spaces for them to nest in nest boxes. We can talk more about that if anyone has questions later on. Okay, so just a few examples of great habitat gardens. They're showing different layers of vegetation and also the importance of providing habitat for other animals like insects, lizards, frogs, by using rocks, logs and leaf litter. This can be a challenge in schools because kids love to play with these things as well, but you can try and establish boundaries around what students are able to access or making sure you use garden beds and students can't access the materials in those. Like I mentioned, garden beds can be great for schools because there can sometimes be limited space. I think the picture here on the left shows a great use of space. It's just probably a smallish space by a walkway with a fence right next to it, but just using that to plant really dense layers of shrubs, I think is a great option. If you're planting where students can access the garden, make sure you're planting really tough species. So things like these, I think it's a lamandra, probably that big grass species there. They're super tough and will withstand most students' tramplings. Another way to plant is just planting really dense thickets of these shrubs and food plants. So it doesn't matter, I mean, it can be great if it's a small plant, small and spiky with the really small flowers, so that it's providing lots of food for those little bird species. And I just wanted to mention a couple of the things that you can add to your garden. So bird baths is a really quick and easy way to provide an essential resource for birds. It doesn't have to be a fancy bird bath. It can be any type of dish, as long as you're, for example, putting a rock or a brick in the middle of it to make sure it's safe and things don't get stuck in the dish. Bird baths should be placed in safe, quiet areas, and they should have perches nearby, so be placed near trees or shrubs so that birds can escape or check for danger. So it can take over 100 years for natural hollows to form in trees, and old trees can be rare in our cities. And that's a really big problem for species that use hollows to nest. So a great way that you can provide an alternative is to provide a nest box. Nest boxes come in all different shapes and sizes for different species of birds. So do your research on which birds you want to provide that resource for, and what they need. There's lots of great resources online, and you can build your own nest box or buy them ready-made. Just make sure when you're installing a nest box that you're being safe and you're having someone that knows what they're doing to install that. And be mindful that installing a nest box doesn't finish at putting it up in the tree. You do have to monitor them to make sure that either pest bird species or say honeybees aren't using their nest box, and be prepared to evict any of those pests that are using it. There's lots of resources on our Birds in Backyards website. The address is there, and heaps of different guides and options for you there. I also wanted to mention the importance of community education. Even if you are doing a garden, it's very beneficial to do community education around your garden. Or if you have, for example, one of those masked lapwing birds nesting on your school grounds, you might like to do some education, just teaching people about the needs of that bird. You could do that through raising awareness-raising posters or signage, writing letters to council, producing your own bird watching guide, inviting the community to join you for a survey. It's really up to you and your students about what you do with community education, but it can be very empowering and meaningful for students, and have a big impact on the community as well. Okay, I'm going to finish up there, but happy to take questions and very interested to hear about your experiences as well. Thank you for joining and letting me come along today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex, so much for the presentation. That was just excellent summary of all the different actions that we can take. For those of you who are interested in the slides, yes, we will be able to share the slides along with you. And also those who are interested in plant lists for our local area. Obviously, Alex told us about plant lists through the Birds in Backyards website, and also council has some lists and brochures that we can share with you. I think all of our councils have access to some of those resources. So please let us know if you need things, and we can show you some links on our websites and other resources as well. When we share Alex's slide presentation, we'll share some extra resources that are specific to our local areas and other good things that we know that exist that will help you. It would be great to hear your questions now. So if you've got a question, I reckon just unmute yourself and ask away.
Can I go first then?
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm Sandra Newell. I'm actually currently the garden educator at 2 schools. I'm at Maroubra Bay Public. I've been there for quite a while. I've done a couple of bird surveys with the kids over the years, and actually just this year for the first time we've got them coming in. It seems to be a family, which is really great. So I was curious when you said to observe them and to find about. Yeah, I've never seen them before in the school garden, so I'll look that up, and hopefully next lesson I'll get the kids to follow that up. But my other question was,
before you go on, you just dropped out right when you named the species of bird that you'd seen.
Oh, the masked lapwing.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm also out of Malabar. I'm only just new out there this year, and one of the things I do want to do in a bit of a dead space was to create some bird habitat, and specifically using the Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub habitat to bring in those smaller birds. But we do have a problem with the common myna. Now, I've got a problem with the common myna in my back garden, and I was just wondering, are you allowed to catch them? And if you can catch them, what do you do with them? Because they are a pain. They come into my house and poo all through my house. So what can you do with them? I mean, they just keep coming.
Alex?
The common myna, it's a non-native species, so you can catch them. Michelle, you might have some comments as well on how the council encourages you to do that. But I have heard of people using cages. I think they can be tricky to catch, but if you leave them some bait in a cage, you can catch them that way. And yeah, euthanize them.
Yeah, then I was going to say, presumably you've got to take them to the vet to get them euthanized. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure, because I'd found a website that had, there's a bird group in Canberra, and they have a bird, like a noisy myna, not noisy, sorry, a common myna bird cage that you can purchase to catch them. And I just wasn't sure if that was specific to Canberra, that you're allowed to catch them and euthanize them, or if you can do that here as well in Sydney.
Yeah, they have a great program in Canberra. They're very active. So if they had some advice,
we might have to get back to you on that, Sandra. Our councils don't have a specific program about catching miners. I know we trialled one years ago and it wasn't very successful. I think you might have to work with an established program, or somebody has a license, but there's definitely ethical procedures to follow. Somebody's asked if you can kill them. No, you can't just kill them.
No.
You just have to get it done humanely.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
One of the main points, I guess, in terms of managing them potentially is more around creating zones, that you really try to create a zone that's not so attractive to them. And if you can create a zone that's not so attractive, then that means that other birds will be there, and it's not really the habitat that they're going to enjoy. So maybe Alex could say something about that main, what's the main thing that would be different, that it's not going to be as attractive for them?
Well, if you notice where you're seeing them. It's usually around buildings, around, you know, where there's a lot of cement, and it's very built up areas. So like I mentioned, just those building up your gardens into having lots of shrubs, trees, grasses. The more that you can provide that really dense type of habitat, I think that can combat it as well. But it does take a little while for all of those things to grow. So yeah, it's tricky.
I think they're quite territorial, and so persistent shooing them away can really help after they kind of form habits. So if you persistently shoo them away, and they're opportunists, so just make sure there's nothing around that they want, any pet food or rubbish or anything like that. I find them bathing in my dog's water bowls as well, so they just take any opportunity.
Okay, can we have another question?
Can I just ask, somebody is asking if anybody's had any luck in moving on ibises on the chat.
Any response from anyone?
Anybody have any ideas about moving on ibises?
Can I just, perhaps they often come for the garbage bins and then they stand up and they put their lovely big beak inside the bin. And there are some bin lids that don't allow them to do that. So some actions by some schools, I think in the past, have been to change the bin lids. And obviously the whole issue of rubbish in the school, but maybe that would help.
Yeah.
Great. Renee, while we've got your knowledge in your face there, perhaps you can tell us what you think, like one of the most pressing issues. If you could get schools to do one thing in our local areas, what would you be encouraging them to do?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, Alex covered so much there, and the program is fantastic. It really is. In the local context, through the whole eastern suburbs, as you pointed out, the small birds are disappearing in so many areas, but we do have areas, particularly in the north and in the south, which have still got high diversity. And sort of in the south middle, which is exactly where you three are sitting now at Ramsay Park. And so planting density, as you said, and particularly, I think, focusing on the insect attracting plants, because a lot of our street plantings are banksias, and so there is a lot for the nectar feeders already. Not so much for the tiny ones like eastern spinebills, which do sometimes still come to Centennial Park and some of the northern southern areas. But in most of the areas, I think it's the insect attracting plants and that density that Alex spoke about, the prickly plants, the density and the connectivity. And it's that magic of layering, just layering, layering, layering.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Renee. Look, we might break out into our breakout rooms now and have some discussions. Alex, we'll put you into one of the breakout rooms and Renee, you into another, and then we'll be in one of them as well. So you'll go to a breakout room. Something should pop up on your screen to send you to the breakout room. So you'll have to click on that to say yes, and then you'll get sent to the breakout room.
What we're going to do.
So we want you to talk about your experiences with creating habitats. So anything you can say about if you've done a project in your school, any successes, what made it work, and any issues you've had and how you might have addressed those or overcome them, and maybe any questions that you want to bring back to the group.
Yeah.
All right, we think everyone's back now, so welcome back everyone.
Hope you
had
got lost in the
productive conversation and weren't lost somewhere. Yes. Be good just to hear back from the different groups of something that was happening in your room. So maybe Alex, if you want to tell us like a key point that came out from the discussion in your room, or anyone else who was in Alex's room.
Yeah, if anyone else wants to go, Sandra or Lindsay. No. Well, we spoke about two programs that both Lindsay and Sandra are involved in in their areas, and problem birds. So cockatoos, larger birds, ibis, and that, you know, those are either keeping other birds away or meaning that growing things is difficult.
And solution?
Solutions, as I think Renee mentioned, trying to get birds out of their habits by not being in the space, and planting for small birds to create more habitat and connect existing habitats.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Renee, do you want to say something about what happened from your group and any key point that came out?
Renee's just charging her iPad, so I'm not sure if we've...
Maybe somebody else who was in Renee's group.
You're on. Yeah. Somebody else in Renee's group? Just lost Renee.
Yeah, I can.
Thanks.
Hello. I didn't have much to say. It's more just that we're going to get started. Like, we've got an area, it's sort of like a rock garden, and it's got some veggie patches. But we do want to look into doing some native plants, primarily to attract the insects to start with, because we've got a native beehive going. I thought it'd be nice if we could actually plant something that would attract them as well. And then the kids can see it happening.
Fantastic.
Yeah, other than that, I mostly sort of was talking about, because we're near a lot of local bushland anyway, so it's probably a good opportunity. We can probably find out what's growing locally and what kind of birds there are and meet those needs.
That sounds great, Chris. Make sure you reach out to me after the meeting and I'll try to have a chat and follow up with you with that opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can offer you some support with that.
Okay, cheers.
And so then our group, I guess one of the things that we're talking about was really that strategy of how to get the small birds in. And one question that we had that we would love Renee and Alex to speak about is there much success in actually attracting small birds like the fairy wrens into schools, or are schools just too busy environments to actually get those small birds there?
Renee might have, sorry, did you want me to talk about it now?
Yeah, please, yeah, absolutely.
Renee might have more to say on this, but it is tricky because schools are very busy, noisy places, but it's definitely possible. And I mean, I think if you take a walk around your school, you will most likely be able to find some little nook or area that is not used as much. Often it can be the front of the school. The front of the school isn't used by students during playtime, or I've noticed it's often the case, and these areas can be built up for birds. But yes, it is a challenge. So I'd recommend either finding that quiet space or making that quiet space by using garden beds that you can kind of separate from play spaces and really build up with lots of dense vegetation. And in that way it's possible. And also, as we've mentioned, connecting with existing vegetation. So if you are lucky enough to, like Chris mentioned, be right near existing bushland, then build on that. And in that way, it's certainly possible to encourage birds like your fairy wrens to be using your space. The other thing I should probably mention is, there are times that schools are very quiet. So they're only used by those students for about 6 hours a day. And at the other times of the day, they're very safe and quiet for birds. So think about that as well.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Alex. Renee, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just thinking, I've actually done some mapping of the wrens in eastern suburbs, which I know you've seen, and I've superimposed on that lots of the schools. And you actually can see how disconnected the remaining fairy wren habitat is. But if you join all the dots between the schools, you could create these fantastic corridors. And obviously the ones who are near existing habitat are more likely to get them into the grounds earlier. But all working and planting together and coordinating within the next few years, you know, we might make that difference with the schools and preschools all connecting. And if you look at the maps, it's really exciting to see the potential. The other thing is that even if the fairy wrens don't come, we have migratory little tiny birds that fly over the eastern suburbs, and they turn up as they, in May, for example, going north, they end up going right along the whole route of the eastern. Well, I don't know if they come more from the west or more from the south, but I'm thinking particularly these tiny little honey eaters with a yellow streak here, yellow-faced honey eaters, for example, and others with them. If you see, we see them at places like below Kambala, at Nielsen Park, at South Head. I've seen them going across the harbour, but where are they before that? And there's a chance that the habitat that you all provide in your schools might be a stopping off point. And if there's enough density, the noisy miners might not be successful at chasing them before they can catch their breath and have a quick feed. So it's you know, magic, the possibilities.
Fantastic. Thanks, Renee.
Renee, sorry, are we able to share that map that you're talking about with people?
Sure, I'll send it. It may not include all the schools, but I've tried.
Thanks. Thanks. So we need to round up just a couple of minutes. I would just say as a final point, from experience with having connected with a few schools who are interested in this space, it's really important to project plan well for something like this if you want it to be successful. So the advice that we've had just there is, you know, quite general advice about the principles, but what's really helpful is if you do get somebody with some expertise out to the school. So don't just think, oh yeah, well, we'll just plant this area because it doesn't get used, but really have somebody with some garden knowledge to be providing advice there, and perhaps be thinking, Alex and Renee have both said, about the birds that are likely to be in your area specifically. So be thoughtful of that as you plan your project. And for people in our areas, please reach out to us if you want a bit of extra advice and support through council. Definitely in my area, I'm keen to work with some of the schools in our area, and particularly for like next calendar year to be looking at a project with you. So happy to have further discussions with anyone in our area. That would be my wrap up for today from Wallara Council area. So let's just hear from the other councils with any other wrap ups and updates.
Not many updates, but again, yes, if you're interested in creating a habitat in your school, then get in touch, see how we can help and work with you, help in the Waverley area.
And then for those in the Randwick area, let's see, just a couple of announcements. We've got the community investment programs open. So that's a grants program open to the whole community, but schools are included. And then by the end of this term, I'm pretty sure we'll be announcing our next round of school grants, so specifically for schools. And of course, just a reminder, we are at the Randwick Sustainability Hub. We've got demonstration gardens on all these aspects: native edibles, native habitat, and the environment park next door. So the examples of the plants, how they can be assembled into guilds, and the layering and all the thing is all available here. If you come by on a Friday, we're here, and you can talk to us for a long time about all these things.
So thanks everyone. That's the close of our meeting. If you could maybe just unmute yourself and give Alex a big thank you, that would be terrific. Really appreciate your time, Alex.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thank you,
me.
Alex.
Nice to meet you.
And thanks to Renee as well for your local knowledge.
Thanks, Renee.
Absolutely, Renee.
Great to have you all online, everyone. We'll see you in the new year.
See you next
You entered there.